Hello everyone and welcome back to episode 5 of Welcome to the Dark Sun, also known as the one where everything inexplicably works out. It could also be known as the one where Tiffany was super lazy and didn't film it a week ago when she was supposed to, but that's fine. So this was my first session back. I missed 2 because I was away, and not a ton seemed to happen while I was gone. They faced a defiler, which almost went terribly wrong, from what I understand, and they made friends with some preservers from the Veiled Alliance. It's pretty much the main things that happened. They hunted down a pack of Thri-kreen that really wanted to eat the elf, but other than that, seemed to have been pretty normal Dark Sun stuff. For this session, we were short one of our normal players because she had to be out of town, so I finally came back and then we're short another one. So it was myself as Salentithius, and we had Vashti the half-elf bard. We had Dono. I confirmed his name is Dono, not Domo, even though he wrote down Domo. The elven ranger, and Bardock the mall druid, who the more we go on, the more I dislike him. The character, not the player. Although, anyway, we had 2 quests, I think, that were available. Maybe there were 3, but I only wrote down 2, so we're just gonna go with there were only 2. The first one was to get some giant fire beetles for someone to light their shop. And the second one was to go out to some ruins and get rid of the raiders that had taken up residence there. So we decided, you know, it's about a week to get to the ruins. Why don't we take both quests right now, and on our way back we'll just get the giant fire beetles. Nothing will go wrong, right? And I will preface that pretty much nothing went wrong this session. I don't know how that happened. So we went on our way. A couple days out, we ran into some people fighting a tagster. They took them out no problem. Turns out that they were preservers and also part of the Veiled Alliance, because I guess when I was gone, the people from the Veiled Alliance that were in tier kind of got blown up, so they had to peace out, so these new people are coming to replace them. Then we ran into some herdsmen with Erdlu. They had eggs for sale, so Vashti decided to buy 3 because they actually work as your food and water for a day if you so choose, although only for up to a week, otherwise the water situation doesn't work anymore. And the only reason I mention this is because it's important later on. So we carried on our way, and then in a couple more days' time we came across Vix and Wig, who were the preservers from tier that most of the party had already met. They were on their way to Uruk, so I was like, hey, I know this guy in Uruk, can you give him money? Who was Dakos the gladiator that we beat and then set free, and everybody thought he was dead and he went away with his family, and I gave him money then. So hilariously, my character, who's an accidental folk hero, is suddenly kind of becoming a bit of a real folk hero through his kindness and all that stuff. So didn't expect that to happen. I thought he was going to be a bit more of a jerk, but you know, it happens as it happens. Then the next day we're going along and suddenly there's a desert quake. And let me just say this, I failed every single save that was to be made this session, pretty much. So earthquake, I fall down, ground opens up, I fall down through the hole into the cavern, and Bardock actually failed it too, so he came with me. We discussed for a while what we were going to do, and we decided to explore it. Although even as we were like deciding to explore it, half the party was like, oh, I thought we were just gonna leave. So we started to explore, we went through, and it turned out to be a great situation for us. We ended up getting a ton of art and a lot of XP from this experience. The only downside was the DM decided to randomly roll every room in this underground cavern, and so it dragged out a little bit. And I think if we had had more players that night instead of just the 4 of us, it would have been a grind, because like, okay, stop, roll, it's this shape, it's this big, it has this many doors in it, it has this thing in it. And so it was borderline tedious, but we got through, so that's what matters, right? So as we're going, we start collecting treasure, which is not protected really at all, which is super awesome. And then we come to this room, and it has a rug in the center of it. And you had to make a whiz save in order to not just obsessively want this rug. So obviously, it's supposed to cause like inter-party fighting. But everybody made their whiz save except for me, so I was just like, sweet, new rugs! So just rolled it up casually, taking my time. Meanwhile, the other guys see this crystal spider And spiders are the worst things ever. And I didn't even get to be involved in that fight because I was so obsessed with this rug, and then by the time I got over there, they had taken care of him. But they had taken care of him thanks to really terrible rolls by the DM, so it all kind of worked out. I got my sweet rug, and we carried on our way. Next, we start to encounter creatures that we had seen evidence of in footprints, but we hadn't actually come across them. And they were... the DM was calling them chai-teens, and then afterwards he says he thinks they're kai-teens, and he thinks he was saying it wrong, but basically they're hobbit-sized spider bipedal creatures, which are gross. So we took out a few of them, we found a treasure chest, opened it. I was the one who opened it, so I got to roll to see what was in it. The DM said he wasn't going to adjust it, just whatever I rolled we would get, and I rolled a 96, so that's a pretty good roll. And I ended up getting Hayward's Handy Haversack, which is similar to a bag of holding, but slightly smaller. But you know what? This is great. It's an awesome thing to have, especially when we're traveling in the desert and you have weight restrictions because it's Dark Sun. Normally, our DM doesn't worry too much about weight restrictions, but because it's Dark Sun and everything sucks, weight restrictions. After this, we continued on. We found a room and it was locked. We got it unlocked, and in the middle there was a skull. And Bardock decided to pick up the skull. And when he picked up the skull, it didn't start screaming. As much as everybody in the party was like, wow, this skull screams, that's amazing. It was just an alarm, and so a bunch of chai-teens came after us. Kai-teens, chai-teens, ah. But it was a pretty easy fight for us. I think there were 7 of them that came down. And then we just carried on our way with Bardock now wearing this stupid skull on his head. At this point, we're getting pretty much as deep as you can get into this cave system, and we came across a much larger room with a bunch of chai-teen and a Braxet, which is like a weird rhino's bipedal creature from what I understand. And it could have gone terribly wrong, but like I said, this was the session where everything worked out for us, so it didn't go terribly wrong. Bardock was able to get a hold person on him, and then my character Sal ended up putting in like 56 points of damage, so he was done. We're good. We're good. But then at this point, the chai-teen now no longer have this creature to worship, so they're like, oh, we'll worship you. And this just, you know, wasn't gonna work out because we had to leave. Now, remember those eggs from earlier that Vashti bought? Well, Vashti had given one to Dono, and he had basically popped out the bottom and the top and shotgunned this egg. So I took the egg, I brought it back to the skull room, and I put it where the skull was, and I told them to worship that. And they seemed to be fine, so then we just pieced out. I think we collected some more treasure on our way out. Like, it was ridiculous the amount of art that we picked up. And then when we finally got out of the cavern, the DM was like, you know what, you lost a day because you were down in the cavern, so I'm gonna add an extra day. So he rolls, and he rolls that we encounter preservers. So we run into Vix and Wig again, and they're sitting around this old treasure chest that they found in like a divot in the sand, and they don't want to open it because it's clearly from another time. But Salentithius, with his amazing lockpicking skills, just opened it like it wasn't anything. Dono opened it, and inside there was a steel great axe. My DM was so mad that we found this. Like, he's like, I'm gonna add an extra day to make it more difficult for you, and then we ran into this, which is awesome because steel on Dark Sun, or iron, or whatever, any metal, is so hard to come across. And so, even though it was way too big for anybody to handle without disadvantage, we took it, obviously. And then we carried on our way. The next day we made it to the ruins, and we weren't really sure what to expect, so Bardock transformed into a Bazrag and he went exploring through the camp to see what was going on. And it turns out that the person who sent us on this quest was either greatly mistaken or really wanted to get rid of these people because they weren't raiders, they were former slaves. Former slaves who were dying and unarmed. So at this point we're looking at our party and going, well, who's the least threatening to go in there? And it's like, well, Mulls kind of hate elves, so that kind of puts our elf and our half-elf out. We've got a Thri-kreen, who they're probably going to think is going to eat them, because there were a couple elves, so probably shouldn't do that. And then you've got Bardock, who's a Mull and a former slave, so you know, maybe, but also he likes to kill children, so that's a bad thing. But we kind of all went in together, and he was a dick, as he always is. They're like, oh, hold up, we're armed. He's like, no, you aren't. I just saw you guys are useless. This leadership in here is terrible, blah, blah, blah. But I came up with a great idea. See, we just found this cavern with some weird creatures that are willing to worship pretty much anything. Why don't we bring all the slaves there? They'll be safe. and we'll have done our job clearing the ruins. So we talked to them and they were very amenable to this suggestion, and so we camped out with them for a day or two, we fed them, and then as soon as the weather cleared because the sandstorm came up, we headed back to the cavern. When we got there, I was like, hey Chai Teen, stop worshipping that egg, come worship these guys. And then Bardock spent a day to make the soil really fertile, or as much as he could, up around the top of the opening so they would have good food. And so, see, good deed. Worked out well for us, and we didn't have to fight for those ruins, and the ruins were empty. Check. Task complete. But if you remember, we did pick up a second task, which was to get some giant fire beetles. And so we started heading back to Tyr, but we started looking for them, and Bardock can do a ritual to figure out if there's a certain creature within 5 miles. And so he did that, and we found some. So we headed in that direction. When we got there, we found, I think it was 3 or 4 fire beetles just on these leaves, and we're like, hey look, we can just get these. And then a voice was like, no, leave those alone, they're my pets. And we look around and there's nobody around, and then suddenly another druid appears. And the 2 druids, so Bardock and this other druid, were jerks back and forth to each other like you wouldn't believe. And finally, rational heads prevailed, and we're like, you know what, if this druid is just chilling here, if he was invisible, he's probably pretty high level, we should just leave him alone. So we did that. So we went off more than 5 miles away from him so Bardock could do the ritual again, and we found some more in X direction. So we headed off that way. And while we were heading that way, we saw evidence of people going in that direction. So our ranger checked out the footprints, and it was elves. 12 elves. 12 elven raiders. So, you know, normally you would just go, let's wait for them to go off, or let's go elsewhere. But Dono was like, no, we're gonna take them out. This is fine. But we weren't stupid about this though. We set up a very good plan because they were pretty far away from us. I think it was about 330 feet. So Bardock used Move Earth and set up like these berms. And then right in here we had like a spike growth kind of situation. So if they got to us, we could jump off the berms of sand, hide behind it, and they would take damage coming through. But to start, we all lined up on top of these new kind of sand dunes that Bardock had made, and we started shooting arrows with great disadvantage because 330 feet is a very long way away. Meanwhile, Bardock summoned some pterodactyl-like creatures and sent them off. So you've got 6 elven raiders on the far side that are shooting arrows back at us, then you have 6 that are advancing, and it's just like this huge, like, everybody getting closer together. But by the time they got to us, everybody was pretty much dead, so it worked out really well for us. And we got some short swords and some longbows that we got to sell later, so see? Everything was working out for us this time. After that, we moved on a little bit more, came across those giant fire beetles. Task complete. Got back to Tyr, collected our money for that. Everything was great. Everything was fantastic. And that was the end of that session. So like I said, this was the session where things could have gone wrong, but in the end, everything turned out perfectly. We got so much loot, we got so many weapons, I got a really sweet rug, and we knocked off 2 tasks and helped some people out. So it was an amazing session. Like, sessions don't go that well even not on Dark Sun, and then on Dark Sun for that to happen, and then we got that metal weapon, which will come into play in the next session because we needed to figure out a way to make it usable for our characters. But that's about it for this session, so make sure you come back to see the next session, episode 6, which I have already played through, so I can get it up pretty quickly. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.